Okay, happy Friday, guys. Give me a second here to make sure that everything is working okay and that you can see and hear me, and then we'll get started. Okay, that seems to be working. As usual, you're welcome to use the live chat on YouTube. I'll answer any questions as we go, but if you do have any that you think of later or you're watching this on the replay, don't hesitate to shoot me a message. I'm always happy to answer any questions. Hi, Linda. Okay, so today we're gonna paint a vignette or a couple of vignettes depending on how we get on with time. So what are vignettes? Vignettes, they're like this little gem in your creative arsenal. They're a tiny scene. Hi, Susanna. They're this tiny little scene that captures maybe a snippet of a scene or an idea. There's something that's a little bit incomplete, a little bit raw, and they're just a lovely way to spend some time painting. Hi, Jane. One of my favorite things to do is to paint these little scenes because you can just squish them into your sketchbook. You can squish them into whatever time you have available. You can squish them into whatever materials you've got lying around. They're so flexible. They're also really good for trying out new ideas, whether that's a color combination for a scene to create a certain vibe, whether that's a new type of object that you want to paint, be it trees or plants or rocks or anything really. You can see here I've got like a few different things that I've done with these vignettes previously. And this one really was just exploring leafy textures kind of layered up to create a sense of depth. This one was just a kind of a hodgepodge of little plants and textures. This one at the bottom here is more of a scene where I'd kind of tried to incorporate like a background and then this little mossy stump that I wanted to try out. And then this one is just some layered plants. And you can paint these again and again and again, and you'll get something a little bit different every time. And that's what I love about them. Some of my best ideas for projects have come from little bitty scenes like this. So they're quick, they're flexible, and they're really useful. That's why I love to paint them. So that's what we're going to do today. And we'll go ahead and grab some colors. Now this can be whatever colors you like, whether you're going for a particular vibe with a color scheme or whether you're just going to grab whatever kind of colors you feel like painting with. So today I've got some favorites. I've got Windsor green, Prussian blue, white, a little bit of yellow, a little bit of black, and maybe we'll start with these colors. Brush wise, you're not going to need much in the way of brushes for this. You're going to want something to paint the background with, so a larger brush, and then you're going to want something to paint some plants with. I've got my 1/2 inch angled shader for the background, and then this is a size 2 liner and a size 4 round for painting everything else. If you do have different brushes that you want to try out, then this is a great way to do that. So don't feel restricted to the colors or anything really. Let me go ahead and put some colors out. So the first thing that we start off with in a vignette is painting a little bit of a background. And vignettes are a great thing to paint when you don't really know what to paint, and sometimes we can take it upon ourselves to need a full plan before we start painting, and it kind of gets in the way of us actually starting. So if you do find yourself like that, I recommend just painting a background and working with whatever comes of it. It's always easier to work with a page that's got a bit of colour on than it is to just keep staring at a white page. That white page, it'll just suck all of the creativity right out of you. So a little bit of black. So I've given myself a double spread here to paint a couple of bits. So I'm going to start, I'll start over here on the left and grab some colours. This is a little bit of the Windsor green and white. Maybe a bit of yellow in there to warm that up. And without too much thought, just gonna put a little bit of colour on the page. Now you can paint these with something in mind, but you don't have to. I'm gonna mix in a little bit of Prussian blue so it gets a little deeper down towards the bottom here. And this has got that white mixed in, so it's a little bit cloudy here in the background. And you can see I'm working quite dry for a couple of reasons. One, I don't want y'all to have to wait whilst the paint dries, and it means that it can blend together quite easily on the page. So a little bit of this, a little bit of that, just getting some colours on there. I like this transition of light to dark. It means that I've got space to put light shapes over dark areas, dark shapes over light areas, and we can be a little bit flexible with how we want to add things to our little vignette. And it doesn't need to be any specific shape or anything. In fact, I'm going to put maybe just a little bit of that light colour down at the bottom. And with these, there is no right, well, every way is right. There is no wrong way to do these. So you don't have to worry about doing them right or wrong. I'm just going to pop in something light down here at the bottom. And we already kind of look like we've got a little bit of illuminated ground here against some darker sort of bushes. Okay, so we've got something that resembles a little bit of a background. Hi Liz. Now I'm going to switch to a smaller brush, and this is completely optional. I do this sometimes and other times don't worry about it so much. But we can go around those edges and shape them a little bit into some plants. Sometimes I like to leave it kind of raw and unfinished like that and just paint within this background shape that I've created. And other times I like to go ahead and shape up those edges to look like the plants at the very edge of the scene here. So taking just a round brush, and I've got a paler green, kind of something similar to the colours here, and we can just kind of add some little leafy shapes any kind of shapes that we want to break apart this edge into something that looks more like plants instead of unfinished brush strokes. And when you do this, try out a few different things. Sometimes I like to use the shape of the brush to stamp a leaf shape onto the page, kind of like just like that, and just do that in a group of a few together. And when I've got something that looks a little bit interesting, I can just fill in the rest of that space. And it brings this edge to life. Another thing I like to do is use just a broken spotted texture. Just dotting the tip of the brush onto the page, letting some of that background show through so we can have the suggestion of some plants and some leaves. Maybe they're a bit smaller so we don't get that exact leaf shape. And when you do this, as you work around, you can change that colour a little bit, change it with the background as it changes when you come down the sides, or you can adjust it to create additional layers. So another little broken leaf shape up here, just lightly trailing the tip of the brush to create that interesting texture around the edge. And we don't really even have to think about anything else that's going on in this space. We can just focus on a small area and that little bit of texture. And we can do this around the edge, and we can also do it within this space as well. So where we've got this darker edge that comes up here, we can treat this like we would the edge of the page. So we could take a little darker colour. This was a bit of green with a little bit of blue. And we can do the same sort of broken textures that are going to overlap that unfinished painterly edge. And we get this sense of layers and interest within the shape as well. And it's one of the reasons why I often like to leave a little bit of rough brushwork when I'm painting backgrounds, because so many interesting things happen. And these are things that if we tried to think of and plan, we perhaps couldn't execute them nearly as well than the ones that we encounter by accident. So I always love to give the paint a little bit of an opportunity to, bring its own creativity to the table. So I'm going to take this darker blue-green, and I'm just going to use this to maybe bring up some textures in this area here on the right. I like to keep sort of leafy, canopy-like or bush-like textures towards the top. Then down towards the bottom we can expand to those plants that would grow up off the ground in interesting shapes. And this can be whatever you want. If it's like ferns or palms or just any kind of leafy structure. And honestly, do a lot of making it up as you go. You'll find really interesting shapes just dabbing the brush onto the paper in different ways. If you find it a little bit intimidating to make up these kind of textures and leafy shapes, then you can always work from a reference photo. One of the things that I love to do is take pictures of plants, much to Richard's everlasting patience, of anything that we see when we're out walking. So like this. Let me see. There we go. So this is a picture that I took I think it was last summer, maybe the summer before. And I love this arrangement of layers and shapes. And it gives us some really good ideas when it comes to painting vignettes and practicing plant shapes. We've got this lovely selection of overlaps in the foliage here, where every bit of this scene is full of texture, but how we use the colour and how we collect the shapes together will change how our scene is brought to life. If we painted the same colour and the same textures all over, we would lose this sense of depth that you get where those shapes disappear into the shadows. And it's why it's okay to just kind of mix your colours as you go and experiment with how they look on the page, because, you know, sometimes you might mix a colour that isn't as light or as dark as you might like. But when you look at a scene like this, like, there's so much variation in the contrast of those colours to create all the different layers. And I find that, you know, a bit like Bob Ross said, we can have these happy accidents where we've got a small patch that perhaps isn't showing up as brightly as we had intended it, but we can make an adjustment and put it a little brighter next to it, and then we get this double kind of layer of light and foliage. And you know what, if you don't tell anybody, it looks like you planned it all along. So all of these little ways that we can experiment and try out new things, they're all gonna, you know, fill up our toolbox of techniques that we can pull from when we're painting an actual scene. And sometimes I'll get out my little pages of vignettes that I've got in my sketchbook to see how I've captured these different layers and textures to create something interesting. Because I definitely have little favorites from past vignettes that, you know, I turn to often because I want to paint them in a fuller scene. So reference photos are always really handy, especially if you're not super confident just kind of making up some plant shapes. But really, you know, that confidence is only going to come with trying things out. So don't think that you've got to be an expert before you can start doing stuff like this. Oh, excuse me. Realistically, you can do this a whole lot and still not be an expert. So there's no point waiting for that. I'm just kind of making these loose little shapes here. And then kind of where I end up with this mixture that was a little bit darker than perhaps this that was next to it, we can just kind of scrub some of that colour onto that area until it runs out on the brush. And it'll help it to blend in a little with what's already there on the page. I'm going to take some more of this dark mixture and just tidy up some textures over here. And this, you can switch freely between your liner and your round brush, whatever is going to suit you better. I also like, this is the round petal brush. This is a bigger brush, but you can't really tell when it's dry, but when it's wet, even though it's a bigger brush, it comes to a much finer, longer point than my smaller round brush. And that's also a really nice brush for painting plant shapes, especially some of those nice kind of longer leaved plants. So I'm just adding in some little leaf shapes here, and leaves grouped like this are always kind of little triangular shapes. Doesn't really matter whether they're super pointy or whether they're chunky triangles. Each plant has its own characteristic look. And if you try something, try a small grouping of a particular shape. If you don't like it, change to a different shape. But by keeping these small groups of similar shapes, we get this impression of different kinds of plants. Again, just adds to that sense of variety. Down here at the bottom, I'm just gonna do some like little rounded shapes, little bushes or whatever down here. Making those edges nice and interesting, maybe leaving some little gaps, letting that background show through. And again, if your colours don't quite match up, just kind of scrub over them until you run out of paint, and it'll mix with whatever's in the background and blend them in much smoother. I like to blend away those edges, just so whatever I layer over the top, there's not going to be a kind of unfinished edge. I don't have to plan for that edge. Just blend it away into something soft, and then it doesn't really matter what you put over the top. Okay, so we've got these nice edges, and already it's kind of made this into something much more interesting. I'm going to take a little bit of this paler colour and use this down here just to add some lighter plants along this edge. And I've got this little section here that I haven't added anything on, so I'm going to pop a little of this lighter colour there, just in some small groups of little clustered marks, overlapping the outer edge of the vignette and then coming into this darker area. Just dotting the brush onto the page for that little bit of nice texture there. And this is where it really excels, where we begin to overlap the lights and the darks to get these really nice areas of contrast. So we've got this edge at the bottom here that's going to be perfect for that. And what I want is a nice light colour. I'm going to mix a little bit more white and more yellow into this green. And we can go ahead and work along this edge here, almost exactly like we've done around these other edges. We're just going to create this into an interesting texture like the rest of this. These are going to be the little bits of plants on the ground, just kind of peeking out of the shadows. And these can be kind of more delicate shapes. Just simple little leafy things. Again, just stamping the brush on the page. We can fix this line into something that looks like more grassy layers with longer strokes. If you do any grass that you want to be kind of wispy at the tip, always start at the base of the grass and kind of flick upwards. That way the finest tip is always going to be the very end. And then when we get to like the edges here, we can use those shapes that we've already got and imply that maybe there's a cluster of those there. So I'm just going to paint that shape again, but in the paler colour over this darker area. So this was kind of like a stem, just with some leaves. And then just some little dots under the corner there. So working across, just going to carry on this line here. Maybe add in some larger plants now. Maybe do something a little bit chunkier. But we still got that lovely sense of contrast. Just curling some of these leaves down so they look like they're growing towards us. And kind of underneath the bottom here, maybe we don't want all of these to be the same green. In which case we can take a little of the darker colour, whether that's a bit of blue or green, whatever you have on your palette, and you can kind of finish the shapes off in that slight varied colour. And it gives you more of a sense of depth. You can even go over some of those the shapes that are there to get this gradual fade into something a little bit darker. A lot of the times when I run out of a certain colour, I'll change it to add a slightly different colour, and you know, we get a lot of interesting mixtures that way. You can also use that darker colour to add maybe a few details onto your lighter leaves. Or even just shade those little bits that have turned towards you. So in this space over here, I also want to add, maybe there's like a little bit of a rock in there that's got some moss on. So maybe we begin to establish kind of like a little shape or a level, or maybe it's kind of a rock that's partially covered. And I've got a colour here that's perhaps just a little bit too similar to what's there. I'm going to lighten that up, so I can add in this surface that we can pick out a little better. That's better. I'm going to pick out like a rocky level there. And kind of like we do everywhere else, pick out that top edge, and then you can go ahead and blend the rest of it away into the background. Every time we do this, we create another layer in the scene. And then we don't have to worry about what kind of goes on back here. We don't need to know everything, and we don't need to paint everything. We're just interested in building up those textures. So on my little level here, I'm gonna add some nice textures. Some nice, just dots of paint. Build this up along this edge for little bits of moss that are catching the light. Just dotting the paint on. I'm not going to cover that whole area because some of that's going to be in shadow. And I'm going to go even lighter and brighter, a little bit more white and a little bit more yellow. The Windsor green that I've used in this mixture is a really cool toned green. So that yellow helps to warm it up. Just dabbing this on in just little dots, little brush marks to get some texture. Maybe there's a little plant growing on top of there. I want something that's going to be a little bit glowy here. I'm going to use just white and my liner brush to paint in a little plant. And we've got, one of the reasons that this works so nicely when we do the layering is because we've got this lighter edge that we've created, but we've still got all of this nice shadow behind. So it becomes a really nice spot to put in an interesting silhouette that's going to show up nicely over the background. Just dotting a little leaf shape on here and there. Maybe a few little dots, bits of texture further up the moss there. And I'm going to take a little bit of yellow and just work that into these bits of texture. By putting the white on there first, we get this layer of isolation that stops the yellow from just kind of just disappearing into the background. It'll layer over that white and it'll allow it to be much brighter, because the yellow is a semi-transparent pigment. We can also layer it over the top of the greens there as well. And we get this little bright edge. Maybe this has kind of got some little bits of magic floating around it. And you'll see that even though at every stage I kind of know what I'm gonna do, like I know I want to kind of tidy the edges into some plant shapes. I knew I wanted to paint the plant shapes across here, but you know, we can take these little side quests where we kind of follow whatever happens on the page or whatever ideas we come up with next. Because when we run out of those little ideas, we just return to those things that we were going to do. I like this idea of you know, just the creative side quests that we follow to those little ideas that we perhaps hadn't started out with, but that had turned up on the way. I think it takes the pressure off having to know everything right before you begin. Because I think if I'd got to be able to plan everything from the start, I would never pick up my paints and my brushes. It's a little bit too overwhelming, that would be. But I think you get this idea that, you know, artists know everything, and perhaps we're the only ones that have doubts. When, you know, I think everybody feels that to a degree. The only difference is I think some artists don't let that kind of get in the way of doing what they want to do. Okay, so we have a nice little magical mossy rock tucked under there. Okay, so one of the things that I want to point out here is that it's really easy to kind of get pulled into this idea that you've got to fill every space and create something that takes up this whole background area that you've painted. But the truth of it is that, you know, these areas that become vague shadows, these areas here that are behind these dots now that I don't want to paint over those dots. We don't have to do any more with those spaces. They can just be left as they are because we've got this element of interest there. And what I want to do down here now is, even though I was going along with the light colours, I'm going to put a little bit of a really nice dark colour to overlap the bottom of where this rock would come down to. And the background had a little bit of white in, so I know that I can use a dark mixture of the green and the blue with no white in there, and it'll show up nicely over the top. And this again is just to create that sense of variation. The more you do this, the more you'll get a feel for how you like to proceed. And you'll see little areas in your paintings that you feel, oh, you know, I want more shadows there, or I want a plant there that stands out. So I'm just going to take this dark mixture and we're working with these similar shapes still, but I'm just going to overlap this bottom area. Just to create this little patch of shadow. And I'm going to tuck just a tiny amount of white into this. And I'm going to put something larger in there. I want this to be pushed back a little bit. That's what that white will do. Again, just a slightly different shape. This time I've gone for a taller grass. Just tucking it in, and then at the bottom I'm just going to give it some texture around the base, a little bit of lumpiness, and then cleaning that excess paint off the brush. I'm just going to use the cleaned damp brush to just blend that in to that darker blue that is down there. And I get these a little bit of shadows in there. Then I'm then going to take this nice light colour that we were working with along the bottom. And just put in some lumpy little bits of ground over the top to push those shadows back. And I've lightened this mixture up a little bit more, and I'm going to use it to just add some grassy texture into this area at the bottom. Just so it's not quite so flat. I'm going to pop a little bit more white and yellow in there, just so it's got some more staying power. I'm just doing these series of kind of rough vertical lines. To get areas of grass. You can also add little bits of softer texture just with the tip of the brush to get some areas of light in that grass too. Maybe even pop in, grab a little bit of a darker mixture from your palette and pop some of that in there too. When I'm doing this, I kind of unfocus my eyes just so I can almost look just at the values rather than the whole thing. Although I was talking to my husband last night and he said he can't cross his eyes, so I guess not everybody can. I spend most of my time painting with my eyes, not really looking at what I'm doing. It's funny how you can see much better when you're not looking directly at something. Okay, so we've got a really nice mixture of texture down there at the bottom. I just want to pop something in this area up here. And surprise, surprise, that's going to be another plant. So we got a couple of options here. We could pick a darker colour and create a silhouette over this area. We could pick a lighter colour and create a silhouette. We could pick a darker colour and do like a tree trunk. Maybe there's a tree growing through this area, and I think that's what I'm going to do. I'm going to pop a tree growing from maybe over here just up through this section, and then maybe I'll add one little plant over here. We'll see how that turns out. So I'm going to take, with these colours that I've got, I'm going to take a cloudy blue-green that's darker than that background area for my little tree trunk. And like I say, when you do this, you can choose whatever colours you want. If you want to break out a brown and do a brown tree, then that's fine. Sometimes it's easier to work within like a really nice, quite closed color scheme and just work with the values. So anything darker like a tree trunk, I would just do with whatever dark colors I can make from these on the palette. Gives it a really stylized appearance, and I don't think it detracts from it. Although every now and then I do break out the brown, and I really love painting like light on brown trees. Okay, so I've got this dark colour and I'm just gonna tuck it from somewhere vague back there. Anywhere really, it doesn't matter. And I'm just gonna bring that up. With my round brush. Split it off into something smaller. Maybe there's another one. Kind of at the back here. And we can always pop just a little bit of foliage up here, just extending down into the scene if we like. with that same dark mixture. And because it's a vignette, we don't have to worry about finishing off at the top or suggesting what happens up there. And then at the bottom here, what I'm going to do is I'm just going to take a little bit of a lighter mixture just to overlap it slightly. So maybe there's a bush there that's a little bit more illuminated that these trunks are tucking behind. So again, same textures as around the outside, just those simple little leafy, whether you stamp the leaves on the page or whether you just do little groups of spots. And I'm just gonna pick out that edge. No more than that, because what I want to do is I want to retain the shadows down here. So I'm going to clean what's left on the brush there. Just blend that bottom edge in. So we keep those layers. We've got the layer of the moss, then we've got this layer here that these tree things are tucked behind. So the last thing that I would do on this is something here. Maybe give this brush mark here a little bit of shape. So I'm just going to grab a green that's roughly similar. Doesn't matter if it's not perfect. Give it a check, we'll see. Greens are a pain sometimes because they can dry, depending on how much primary yellow is in there, they can dry a whole lot more than you're expecting. Okay, that's a close enough colour. And what I'm going to do actually is I'm going to take this colour and I'm going to add a tree trunk in back here too. Just tucking it behind those darker silhouettes. It doesn't have to be perfect. And we've created an interesting little thing going on back there too. Okay, last thing here. Just gonna sort out this edge of this bush right here. I want a little bit of this dark colour, just with a tiny bit of white in there. And I'm just gonna do what we did around this edge. So I'm just gonna tidy up the edge of the silhouette to give it a bit of structure, a bit of form. Then I'm going to take a slightly lighter mixture. Maybe pick out some of the tufty shapes of this bush here. Kind of imagine it as a series of little rounded clumps. Just picking out where we imagine edges to be catching the light. Just to help give that area some texture. I've just taken a clean damp brush and just blended a couple of those marks in to soften them. maybe I'm going to take a little bit of this pure dark colour and just under where I've highlighted those clumps, I'm just going to pop in a touch of shadows. Just to create even more sense of depth. And if you get an area that you don't like, you can just fuss at it with your brush and it'll mix with what's already on the page and kind of disappear. Okay, so we've created kind of a little bit of a vibe right there. I'm just going to take a tiny touch of primary yellow. I like this little bit of warmth that we've got here, so I'm just going to glaze. Now this is a really small amount of the yellow just in the tip of the brush. Just I'm going to glaze it over some of the light areas close by. Just a little bit of that warmth from that light is spreading out a little bit. We don't have to be super tidy with this because it's a semi-transparent colour. Just means that we get a nice glimmer of warmth. There you go, and that's a little vignette. It's a nice way to create something that you haven't had to think of first. I don't know as I would sit down and think up this exact scene, but we still bring things to life that we haven't had to imagine. So I'm going to go ahead and paint another one here. I'll go ahead and paint one over here, and this time I'll pop maybe like a rock or something in there, or some water, just to give you an idea of how I would include things like that. So as always, we want the background first. This time I'm going to go a little bit cooler, a little bit bluer with the background. So this is the Prussian blue. It's got a bit of green mixed in there because why not? So we're back to the rough background. If you don't want to paint something so rough and messy, you can always do this within the confines of a shape. So a circle, I sometimes will draw a page of circles and fill those in. Or you could even just tape off a section of your page to paint within them, and then you peel away at the end and you've got something a little bit tidier. Personally, I kind of love like this raw edge finish. But I go through phases. Sometimes I really like being able to peel the tape at the end. It's like a little reward. Okay, so just filling this in. So I got something a little bit darker and definitely cooler toned this time. Just like I say, it can be sort of whatever you want it to be. So what I'm going to do here is I'm going to put in some water. And water in these vignettes is super, super easy. You're going to paint your coloured background and then you're just going to use white to pick out your water. Whether that's running water or whether it's a pool of water. The nicest thing about doing this is because we're using white, that white's going to mix with all of those colours that are there. You're going to get a lighter version of, let's put in something like this. You're going to get a lighter version. You see how it's mixing with those colours underneath? But that's great because we've got the ambient colours of the environment in the water there. Oh, and it's so easy to immediately get that sense of water. Just going to take a little bit of the dark colour, just add in a few ripples. Cutting back through that pale white. Just softening them in slightly. So I said I was going to do like a rock. So I'm going to take this dark colour, pop in a rock right here. And then what I'm going to do, I think, is I'm going to give this a little bit more light. I see I've got this kind of lighter section here, and I'm just going to pop in a little bit more of that. A little bit more white right there. Just going to pop it straight in over the top and then roughly blend it out. Just so everything is not super dark. And once again, you can see with the textures of the background, you can see all of the layers that are implied already without us having to do anything. What I'm going to do is actually I'm going to take I'm going to finish this off by putting a dark layer over the very top. I've already got dark here, so not so much this side, but here where we've got all this light, I'm going to bring a dark silhouette from down here and kind of tuck it up over the lighter areas, so we've got this nice contrast back here. So I'm going to do this with that in mind. I don't want to put too much detail over on this light area because I'm going to bring that in. So let's go ahead and we'll pop something over here. And this can be, I don't know, a little bush or something. And I don't want this kind of super dark silhouette colour. I want something that is slightly cloudier. So I'm going to start with that colour. That's the blue and the green. Makes this kind of like nice teal colour. And then I'm just going to pop a bit of white in there. And hopefully this is lighter than that and darker than that. So what did we say? We said a little bush. So just tapping the tip of the brush. Letting a little bit of space be between the strokes. And one thing you want to be careful of when you do this, and I've noticed it, I've done it here, is that when we're trying so hard to paint randomly, we really easily end up with these little patterns that occur. And I've kind of done it here. I've got a bit that sticks out and then it goes in and then it goes out and then back in. And we have to really pay attention to get rid of those when we see them, because they stop it looking natural. So I'm gonna bring this up. Maybe there'll be some little vines that hang down here. And we'll pop some little leaves on there. And straight away, just through the use of colours and different plant shapes and stuff, we get a really different looking scene. So this silhouette that I've done here of these bushes or whatever these are, this front edge I'm going to leave nice and detailed. And then that back edge, I'm just going to blend out. That way we get this softness where if we wanted to add something else, we could. But if we don't want to add anything else, it stops us having to worry about where to finish these plants. Because sometimes if we take those shadows all the way to the edge, we lose this kind of mystery of what's there, that kind of lovely suggestion that there could be more things there, maybe we can't see them. And it sort of adds to this vignette effect of being incomplete. Okay, so what are we going to do down here at the bottom? I'm going to pop in some lighter details across the moss here, and maybe a few plants over here. So I want to keep everything pretty cool this time, but we know our Windsor green is already cool. So a little bit of Windsor green and white, and I'm going to use that for a little bit of texture on the top of the moss here, on the rock. And what I've done is I've flattened that brush on the palette so that it spreads out. We can use it almost like a filbert brush, just to pat that paint on the page and get this little bit of texture. I'm going to add a little bit more white to that. And do the same again just on the top. And then I'm going to switch to my liner brush right here and go really pale now with this. And I'm just adding some tiny dots for some highlighted texture across the top of the moss here. If you get a little bit that stands out too much, you can go ahead and rub at it with a clean damp brush and it'll disappear in. So what about if we had some, let's go with the plant on the moss theme again. So I'm going to pop in some little details here. Maybe a little fern. A little leafy thing. Some grasses. We've got that lovely dark area behind that we get that nice contrast against. A little leaf. Whatever sort of fine textures we want to give that a little bit of interest. And if you find yourself looking at a vignette while you're painting and wondering what to do next, I recommend looking at kind of what you can vaguely see in the scene. Again, that's why I love to leave a little bit of texture everywhere, but you know, you can still do this even if you want to smooth stuff out. You've just got to be a little bit more creative in how you approach it. Distance will help you do this, especially if you're not used to kind of unfocusing your eyes and seeing what the page suggests. If you stand back and look at it from a distance, or if you take a picture of it with your phone so you can see it flattened and on a screen, set it a little bit further away from you and look and see what you notice about the page, because there'll always be little things that look like they could become something. So when I look at this, I notice this shadowy spot in the background here. Looks like maybe there are some more things disappearing off into like a mysterious foggy background back there. And the same is true here of the little bit of softness that disappears off the edge of the page. I've got this section of more vibrant green here. And again, that looks like it could be something more interesting. and really pick a spot and add something to it. It doesn't have to be anything complicated. These shapes that we've painted here are just, you know, there's not much variety in them. They're simple leaf shapes or spotted textures arranged together in different size clusters, different size brush marks, different shapes of arrangements, whether they're in like a ball or whether they're grouped around a stem. And just aim for variety, because you will never be disappointed, especially if you've got this really nice variation of things going on. So I've added these lighter plants here. I think I actually want some lighter plants, some larger ones leaning in over here. So I'm going to switch back to my round brush. Get a little bit of white. Grab a little bit of that green down here, just so it's not stark white. And these are going to be like ghostly pale leaves. Maybe some bigger ones. And they can just kind of like grow into the scene down here. And we've added another layer, and it's really as simple as that. You want your variety of plants, your variety of sizes of your clusters of your marks, your different brush shapes. Choose your values so you get variations in the contrast. So some areas are high contrast, where you've got a big difference between light and shadow, and then some areas are low contrast that suggests there's little things going on in the background. And with these really simple techniques, you can package them up to be different every single time. I'm going to take a little bit of this pale colour that's on the brush here and just use it to edge around the bottom of the rock there and along the ground here. Just highlighting that water's edge. Maybe I'll pop in a few reflections. And I'm gonna blend those into something a little softer. I read an interesting thing once that said that in a painting, your eye is always drawn first to the area of the highest contrast, regardless of composition or what elements or subjects are in the scene. Your eye will always be drawn to that biggest difference between light and shadow. And it's something that I think about quite often. I don't always manage to do that in my scenes, but I try and think about it, because I think, especially when I'm looking at paintings, I always try and see if my eye is drawn to that area of high contrast, and you know, it is. So we've got a little bit of nice variation in the water there, and I'm just going to add a little bit of this dark colour just underneath the stone, so we've got a little suggestion of it reflecting. Just filling that hazy area in with dark. Capturing the reflection of that hard edge is especially impactful, even if we don't really do anything else. Okay, so we've got some plants, we've got some things going on back here. I want to add that final silhouette that comes around the front here. And I think I want to add some plants back here. I think that's a little bit too plain back there. But what I'm going to do is I'm going to add this shape at the front here so that I can see, because I don't know what I want to add there yet. And maybe having this that I do know that I want will help. So we're back to the darkest mixture for this foreground silhouette. So that's that mixture of the blue and the green for that dark teal colour. It doesn't matter if it runs slightly blue or slightly green. I find the darkest mixture runs slightly bluer of this. And what I'm going to do is I've got a couple of options. I can curve something round, like we've got a tree root here, or I can just have something that grows straight up and over. And I think that's what I'm going to do. So I'm going to add in, and I try not to think too much about this. At the end of the day, it doesn't really, these are experimental, so it doesn't have to be perfect. I'm going to pop in a nice chunky trunk. That's a tongue twister. Pop a little branch on that. I'm gonna split this further down to pull this off up here. Oh, that always makes a nice, interesting shape. I love how that has pushed everything back in the scene. And what I think I'm going to do is I think I'm going to pop in just a few plants around the bottom here. So these would be the closest foreground plants. And again, nothing too creative here. I'm going to take these same shapes that I've already done and just do them in a different colour. Overlapping the water and the trees. Maybe just a little hint of something over here too. Seeing as though I've painted it onto this other page here. I don't want to just leave it. So this is just a simple stem and then just stamping some leaf shapes on. One of my favourite ways to stamp natural looking leaves, especially when they're growing towards you, is you put the brush on the page and just kind of drag down, you get these little kind of triangular shapes. So instead of your leaves always being like the stamp of the brush, we can get this bit of variation in those shapes. And when we gather them around a stem, it looks more natural. So nothing really special down here. I'm just kind of filling in a little bit of the dark, just to make that into a pleasing shape down here at the bottom. Okay, let's see what that's done. Okay, so I think we can still pop in a couple of plants into the background there. I'm just going to add one more branch there onto that, I think. Okay, so these plants in the background here, we can go dark or we can go light. What I'm going to do is, because everything else is so dark and we've got these nice lighter details, I'm going to use a little bit of this lighter green back here. That way, if they're too light, I can soften them into the background colours. Having that white in there means that they'll look like they belong back here. But I want them to be a little bit more subtle than these super bright. What I'm going to do is add some little taller, almost like these kind of like taller pointed little marks around a stem. And I'm not going to bring them all the way down because I want to blend that bottom edge into that shadowy area by the water. Took some behind this tree back here. You can see how like soft and hazy those details look. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to take a clean damp brush, soften that bottom edge in so it's disappearing into that darker area. Then I'm just going to take a little bit of a brighter colour and just pick out the tops again. Now this will soften up a little as it dries. But it means we get this nice variation or this nice gradient from lightest at the top and then getting kind of softer as they disappear into the shadows. And we can do that, this little interesting dark patch back here that keeps catching my eye. We can do that with that too. I'm going to take this dark teal mixture, grab a little white, just to hopefully lighten it up a little bit. And then I want to create these same shapes but within, over the top of this dark area. And I think that's got just a little bit too much white in, because even I can't see that. got those few little interesting shapes back here in that dark section. So I'm going to finish this one off. With some glowing white spots, because why not? And I'm going to pop these kind of appearing back here. And disappearing off through the front here, making some of these a little bigger. Just making some of them a little softer, a little more glowy. This is just a clean damp brush. And then I'm just going to take a little bit of fresh white and dot that back in the middle where they've blended out. And these ones that are close to the water, I'm just going to add just a little bit of a reflection there. And I want to interrupt some of those reflections. Just blending that water surface through them a little bit. Where those ripples are. And I think I'm going to leave that one at that. So I hope you've enjoyed seeing how how much fun it is to bring these vignettes to life, and just what a variation that you can create relatively quickly and with no plan in advance. That's such an appeal to these, is that, you know, you can sit down and with an hour you can create something from scratch just by throwing paint on the page and working with whatever it comes out like. If you give this a go, I'd love to see, and I hope you find this a useful technique to use when you're painting. Like I say, if you do have any questions when you give this a go, don't hesitate to get in touch. I will put a checklist on the class page of like the process for this, so that if ever you're doing it and you're like, oh, what do I do now, you've got something to refer to that will help. Okay guys, that's me out of here for today, and I shall see you next time, or I shall see you again for the live class later this month. Thanks for joining me today. Happy painting!